Alright, now we're going to start with our next chapter of our neuroanatomy, that is the cerebellum. In my previous lectures, we have explained about what the spinal cord was, what were the ascending tracts, what were the descending tracts. Now we're going to move from a less complex area of the brain to a more complex, that is the cerebellum. Before going and pulling your hairs off by seeing this whole board filled with so many diagrams, I'll explain one by one each diagram. And for that, first of all, let's have a little bit basics and introduction of what is a cerebellum. First of all, you should know where the cerebellum is and what is a cerebellum. Basically, we all know, we have studied in our high school classes that cerebellum is basically a part of the brain. Now you will be like, there are so many parts of the brain. Which part of the brain? So it is in the hindbrain where the cerebellum is basically present. And where it is located, here in this diagram, I have shown that this is your brainstem, this line. This one is the brainstem. Here you have the pons, this one. And just posterior, meaning behind or on the back side of the pons, you have the cerebellum. So part of the hindbrain, which is on posterior to the brainstem, posterior to the pons, is located your cerebellum. Now we know where it's located. Now what is the function? What is so much important in cerebellum? Basically, the three basic functions that all medical students want to know about cerebellum is that they help in the tone of the muscle, like they help in the toning, how to contract, how the muscles should be strongly contracting or strongly relaxing. Second, you have balance. Whether, like all the fibers, if you have to contract your forearm, then all the biceps muscles have to contract and they will have to relax the triceps muscle. So for the balance. Number 3 is the coordination. Whether you want flexion of the elbow, then all the bicep muscles, they must work together so that the muscles or the elbow joint can be flexed. And if you want to extend the elbow joint, then all the tricep muscles have to work together in a sequence to cause extension of the elbow joint. These three are the basic functions of cerebellum. There are many other functions, but according to second-year MBBS students or first-year medical students, these three functions are more than enough for you guys. Now, coming into a little bit into the structure of the cerebellum. That is related to this diagram. Well, we know that cerebellum is located on the posterior side of your brainstem and on the posterior side of the pons. This is basically a side view. So you're looking on the patient or you're looking on the person from the side. And on looking from the side, you will observe that, okay, on the right side is your brainstem and behind that is your cerebellum. Now, you may be identifying or you must be confused that what is these three triangles being shown in the cerebellum. Well, these are basically the three lobes of the cerebellum. Like in your brain, you had the three parts of the brain, forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. Same is the case with the cerebellum. You have the three lobes identified with three different colors. Now, why I have identified it with three different colors? It's because so the one, same is the case with the cerebellum. It is divided into three lobes. The one indicated with the blue color marker, that is the front lobe. And here we cannot say the frontal lobe because that is the part of the skull and the brain, that it is the frontal lobe, parietal lobe. Here in case of the cerebellum, we will say that the front of the cerebellum, the front lobe of the cerebellum is called the anterior lobe and is known as the paleocerebellum, but you should not know the second name. About the second name, that is not important, but if you want to know it, you can. What is its function? It helps in the tone, how strong the muscle is contracting, how loosely. So all that, whether you want to contract the muscles, biceps strongly or relax weakly, that is done by the anterior lobe of the cerebellum. Now coming to the back of the cerebellum. On the back, there is another lobe. Now we cannot say this is the posterior lobe. We will say we can say that is the posterior lobe, or the other name, that is the neocerebellum lobe. And its function is in your coordination. So all the coordination of the sequence of how the biceps muscles must contract, must relax in one way, that is done by the posterior lobe or the neocerebellum of the cerebellum. Number 3 is the small green color lobe, here the small triangle being shown. This is called as your flocholongioneural lobe. flocculonodular lobe. It basically helps in the balancing, so that it will help in the muscles to contract in such a way that you do not lose the your balancing. These were the three lobes of the cerebellum. Now you can see that there are some separations which are separating this blue color marker, the anterior lobe of the cerebellum, from the posterior lobe of the cerebellum. This depression that separates the blue color anterior lobe of the cerebellum from this posterior lobe is called as a fissure, and the name of this fissure is called your primary fissure. Same is the case here that I have drawn with this line. You can see the short line I've drawn, which separates the red color posterior lobe from the green color, that is the flocculonodular lobe, separating one another, and this fissure is called as your dorsal root fissure. Now, in order to go into more depth about more knowledge about the cerebellum, we're going to look on the cerebellum from the back posterior. Now, coming to this diagram. All right. Here, this is now we're seeing from the patient on the back side. On the back side, same. This lobe is the anterior lobe. Here you have the primary fissure. So, above the primary fissure is your anterior lobe. Below it is the posterior lobe, and this one, which is present most posterior to the posterior, is here. This is known as the flocculonodular lobe. Now, you can see that there is this cavity I've drawn, this one. This central cavity, which is containing all the information coming from the cerebral cortex, higher centers of the brain, is coming here. And now I've shown that there is this cavity or this space, it has been filled with some tracks or something. So this center cavity that has been indicated with this blue color marker is called as the vermis. Here, this one. Here is it located. All right. Now, there are some fibers which are attached not directly to the vermis but to the sides of those fibers which are attached on the sides of the vermis and not into the vermis. Those form another zone called as your paravermal or your intermediate zones. And then most laterally is known as your cerebellar hemisphere. It's not the cerebral hemisphere but the cerebellar hemisphere, because we're studying the cerebellum. So the middle one is called as your vermis, the lateralmost is called as the cerebellar hemisphere, and in between the cerebral hemisphere and your vermis is your intermediate or your paraverbal zone. Now, you may know, a question may arise in your mind that how does the brain identify the different movement? Like, is all the movements of the body occurring in the vermal region or occurring in the paravermal? Like, which is the site for the function area? Well, that will be explained by this diagram. You have been shown here that in the cerebellum, the brain has already made a figure, a topograph, a diagram of the whole human body and the different parts of the human body associated with the different areas of the cerebellum. Now here you can see that this is the vermis, this whole lateralmost is the cerebellar hemisphere, and this one middle here you have the fibers that is called as the paravermal or the intermediate zone. Now here you can see that this is the trunk of the human body located with the eyes. So means that all the impulses which are coming from the trunk, along with you can see the shoulders and your hip, those all impulses will go in the region of the cerebellum known as the vermis. Then you can see that these are certain legs and certain hands which are moving out of the vermis but not reaching all the way to the lateral side or the cerebellar hemisphere, but they are here, this area known as the intermediate zone. So the impulses that will come from our legs or from our hands, they will not go in the vermal region, nor they will go in the cerebellar hemisphere, but they will send their impulses in the intermediate or the paraverbal zone. So if there is any injury in the vermal, then all our motion, our movements occurring in our trunk, in our shoulder, in our hip will not occur. But our hands will occur. Why is that so? Because that part of the region of the brain is not damaged. Fine. Now, coming into a little bit more about the layers of the cerebellum. Cerebellum, you can see here that this is a cerebellum, and the outer covering of the cerebellum is known as the cerebral cortex. Inner, you have a nucleus known as the deep cerebellar nuclei, and these nuclei, they are connected with one another by means of the white matter of the cerebellum. Now we have the different layers of the cerebellum. So you have a cerebellar cortex is going to send the impulses. Now some of the impulses, they will form parallel lines with one another. Those are called as the parallel layer fibers. And some of these neurons will go down very deep to the layers. Those form the deepest layer of the cerebellum, known as the granular layer. These one, the blue color. They will have a neurons which are called as your excitatory or granular neurons. Now, why are they called excitatory neurons? Because these granular neurons, they are excited. On excited, they will release action potential and they will send these impulses up to the most superficial layer of the cerebellum, known as the molecular layer. On the molecular layer, these axons will split into two, one going to the right side, one going to the left side. Then these other neurons, there's not only one neuron in the brain, there are other neurons present in the granular layer. All of them, they will move up from the granular layer to the superficial layer known as the molecular. In this way, you can see that there are a series of parallel lines formed. These fibers, which are parallel to one another and moving in a sequence from down to up, are called the parallel fibers. Alright, and the parallel fibers, they consist of your parallel nuclei, and that's about it. Then you have about what we have. Then you have in between the molecular and the granular layer, you have your Purkinje layer, the middle layer, that are called as the Purkinje layer, which have their own nucleus called as the Purkinje nucleus. The Purkinje neurons, they send branches of their dendrites up into the molecular layer where they're gonna give branches and form synapse with the parallel fibers of the molecular layer. But they will only send one axon down to the excitatory neuron where they will go from the motor neuron and perform their function. Now, if this pathway is moving on and on, then our muscle will always remain in excitation state because all this is performed by your excitatory neuron. But God has made it in such a way that instead there are an excitatory neuron along with inhibitory neurons so that the balancing, everything is done by means of normal condition. So if there's excitation, obviously when you want to run, your excitatory neurons will be excited to perform more fast. But now when you've reached a place you don't want to run anymore, then there are some other neurons which will work but have function opposite to that of excitatory neurons. Such neurons are called as your inhibitory neurons. And that was about the cerebellum introduction. Next presentation will be about the basic mechanisms, which will be tomorrow, and right now in the next video will be how from the signal that has been generated into it, how they are going to go back into the motor cortex to perform its different functions. Hope you guys will have a little bit understanding about the cerebellum. Give your questions and I'll give you answers, and subscribe to the channel.